Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Deb's Way, and I'm Deb. Today, we are going to put the binding on this quilt that I've been working on for several weeks. Now let me just start by telling you that typically this quilt, if somebody was able to start it in the morning of one day and continue on with it, working on it throughout the day, they'd have it finished in just a matter of hours for sure. Especially if it was an experienced sewist, okay? I usually come back to my sewing room for an hour or so in the afternoon. That's about all the time that I take. I could take longer if I wanted to, but I'm usually out and around with William, or we're just busy doing something, so I don't get to sew as much as I might want to sometimes, but no matter what, I just kind of take my time in getting a project done. I'm not in any big hurry. I think that's what burned me out. A couple of years ago, I did some sewing of different quilts and different things for Christmas presents. And I was so busy for a few weeks before Christmas that I just totally burnt myself out, I think. I didn't sew again for probably well over a year after that point. And now it's like I have a renewed excitement in sewing again because I have a brand new machine and I find it very easy to work and I love it. So I'm playing around with it. Today, like I said, we're going to get the binding put on this quilt back here that I've been working on. I've already cut my binding strips and I typically go for 2.5 inches in width, and then you just make them as long as you can. I went like normal width of the material, fold it over and then cut it in half, or not in half, but cut it at 2.5 inches. And I have several strips. I did not measure my quilt ahead of time to determine how many strips I might have to make. I probably have about 8 strips and that should be more than enough. But what I'm going to do now is, actually I have a pile of strips over here. I'm going to piece these strips together and make one big long 2.5 inch strip. You sew it right sides together, and I'm sewing just straight across because then what I'm going to do is press it open against the sides. It gives it more strength that way. And then just make a very long binding strip, okay? So let me get this on the machine and get it going. All right, I've got my strip all sewn together here. Quite a lengthy strip. What I'm going to do next is take this over to the iron and iron this strip in half, okay? So let me get that going and I'll bring it back when I'm ready to sew this onto the quilt. I have my binding ready to go. Let me get the quilt over here. And I've made a major decision. It's major for me when it comes to quilting because I've always done my binding by hand stitched by hand. But this time I decided to do it on my machine. A lot of people do machine binding. This will be my first time. So my first time quilting the quilt top and my first time quilting, or rather sewing the binding in place. So what I'm going to do is attach right sides together, and I'm lining it up with the edge of the material because I left extra batting and the backing material on the back when I cut it apart. So I'm going to match it to the material. And here's a corner piece. I'm going to start further down, like maybe about a yard, not a yard, a foot, like 12 inches away from the corner. And let me add this on here. And then figuring leave about 6 inches before you start stitching. Okay, so about a foot from the corner, you're going to leave about a 6-inch tail of your binding material, and then start stitching the rest of the binding all the way around the quilt top, and I should say all the way along the quilt, using a 1/4-inch seam. So let me get that going here. And I'll pull you down so you can see. Okay, you could pin this if you want to, or use the clip pins. I use the clip pins or the clasps, whatever you want to call them. I use that when I do the binding by hand, but I'm just doing free-handed sewing right now. We'll see how that goes. I watched somebody else on YouTube, of course, do this, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. So, yeah, I'm about a foot away from the corner, and my tail I'm going to leave about 6 inches, and then start sewing my binding onto the quilt. And you're going to leave this gap of unsewn binding because you're going to be joining the two ends together when the binding is all sewn on all the way the rest of the way around the quilt. So let me see here. Where's I want a 1/4 of an inch. Now you'll see I'm getting close to the corner here, right there. So what I'm going to do, about a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, I'm going to place a pin. I want to sew up to the pin. Which will be about there. And then stop. So let's see here. There. Okay, let me backstitch. And we're going to pivot the quilt and go down the other side after I've fixed this corner here. Okay, but I've got the first side of the binding on, and yes, it's stitched to the front, and then you're going to pull it around to the back, and I'm going to mistine stitch in the ditch again. But let me get this corner taken care of first, and then I'm going to continue on all the way, the rest of the way around the quilt. So, here we have a corner. I don't know if you can really see. Let me see if I can bring it closer. What I'm going to do is bring it up like this. So can you see I folded it up over the material, and I'm just kind of creasing it. Now I'm not going to sew it like that. I'm going to put my material folded back over that and continue that way. Let me hold it up here and see if you can see it better. Can you see what I did there? And go back to that corner and start sewing a 1/4 of an inch. First I'm going to tack it down. Because before I go any further with stitching, I want to bring my material back in place. Where's my stiletto? A stiletto comes in handy for this sort of thing too, because you want to get right underneath the presser foot and straighten your material out underneath, because I've got the needle in the material and I just want to straighten everything out underneath it. Okay, and then I'm going to lower the presser feet and start sewing down the other edge. And again, 1/4 of an inch away from the end. Once again, I'm coming to the corner here, and I've already marked with a pin about 1/4 of an inch up from the edge of the material. So I'll sew down to that point. One more, and then I'm going to back stitch, and then we're going to cut threads, because I'm going to turn the material. So this is what we've done here so far. I've sewn within about 1/4 of an inch to the edge of the material, and then cut my threads. I'm going to turn the material and show you how I'm going to finish this edge. More close up than the first one. Okay, so all right, let me see here. So you see, this is my tail for the binding, and I've come to the edge. So what I'm going to do is flip the material, the binding strip. Let me do it this way. Flip it up over the corner and create kind of a diagonal there. Okay, going off the edge there. All right, and then you fold the material back over that edge, just like that. You have a little flap here, okay? And I'm going to continue down this way, but I need to finish sewing 1/4 of an inch away from that seam from the point down. So I'm going to open that up a bit. Okay, we have that material in place. So we're going to needle down, presser foot is down, tack it, and start sewing down the other side. However, I'm going to pull it back down, okay, and remember, I left the seam open about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the material up there. That's where I'm going to start this seam. So the seam will be continuous towards the edge. And I'm just going to tack that in place with a little, well, a couple back stitches, okay? And then start sewing. And I'm going to continue doing this all the way through the rest of the quilt until all of my binding is on. I'll bring it back and let you know what I do next. All right, I'm to the point of my binding where I'm coming up to the edge of the strip where I first started, and you want to even up the edge here, but it is pretty even, so I don't have to trim that up. And you want 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to join these two together. So I will, let's see here, put that way and there, and fold it over about 1/2 of an inch. So that I have enough for the 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. And then finger press it a little bit because I'm gonna trim that up. I'm going to cut my material right in that fold where I kind of finger pressed it, right there. Just like that. Let me get this ready to sew here, right sides together. That right side and this right side. Boy, did I press them good. Okay. And this will go into the machine. And it is a little awkward because you're working with 2 short ends here at this point. Okay, let me get that under there and anchored with the needle. There. And get this one evened up here a little bit. There we go. All right, ready, set, go. Okay, and then you're going to go ahead, see the binding is together, and also I'm going to finger press that open. You want this seam to lay flat just like the others did when I was ironing the binding together. I actually steam press them open, the little seams, but this one I'm just going to finger press. It'll work so that it lays flat like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over and attach it to the front. Let me go back up here where I left off. And I'm going to backstitch. Okay, I have the binding strip all ready to put in place to finish this quilt, and I'm going to do it on my machine. I'm going to finish it up on my machine. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to start it. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do too is trim up my edges here. Yeah, just neaten it up a little bit more. So to do the binding by machine, I'm going to fold from the front to the back and cover that stitch line that is where I attached the binding to the quilt. I'm going to fold the fabric over from the front and cover that stitch line. So I'll be doing it a little bit at a time and making sure that that stitch line is all the way covered. And I'm going to do my best to sew it. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, or at least I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best to do it that way. Okay. This is what's going to take the longest because I'm going to make sure that it covers the stitching behind. It just makes it look nice and neat. So I'm going to continue working on this, and I'll bring you back when I have the binding all on and this quilt finished. Little confession time here. Well, the demo film that I watched on YouTube showed that, well, the lady who was doing the work just folded over her fabric and sewed from the right side, and everything turned out just perfect on the wrong side. Well, it worked for her, but it didn't work for me. So, oh, and she didn't pin either. She just folded it and sewed. So I went back, and yes, I tore out stitches, and I've pinned now. So I'm going to try it this way. If this doesn't work, then I'm going to resort to sewing the binding on by hand, which is how I usually do it anyway, but we'll see how this goes. When I pin it on, I get it covering the, you want to cover up your other stitches and the raw edge of materials. And I've got that covered really well with it folded over. But then when I stitch, it doesn't totally catch it all. So I'm going to give it another try and see how it goes. And if I have to, if it shows up too much, I'm going to rip it out and just do my binding by hand. But I thought I'd come back and, just tell you about the troubles I'm having. Of course, I am used to doing my binding by hand. But anyway, we'll see how this last try goes. It sure would be much faster doing it by the machine, but we'll see. All right, I've got the machine ready to go here. I've got my quilt on the machine. I'm ready to make the final stitching on this. Let me show you. Here we go. Oops. And I'm starting a little ways down from the corner, which is right up here on the end. I don't want to start at a corner, just a little ways down. Doggone threads. There's always a thread that needs to be trimmed, I tell you. Okay, so I'm going to attempt my stitch in the ditch. Let me place the needle first of all in the ditch. There we go. All right. Let's see how this goes. I like these little clips. Let me show you here if I can. They just clamp onto your fabric and hold it in place. Okay. A lot of quilters use them. I'm at a corner here, so what I'm going to do is make a corner out of the material. Very nice. And turn my material. And go down the other side. Once I have that all tucked in there. I used my little thread clippers here to tuck it in, but you could use the stiletto too, like I recently bought. I just kind of grab whatever little straight edge I have here to tuck everything in place. I'm going to turn the corner. All right. And then clip some more here. So I'm going to continue on with this, and I'll bring you back when I have this all finished. Well, I am finished. I've got the binding all around my quilt. Completely finished. Now, let me take those glasses off. Just so you all know too, is that I'm not an expert sewist. I'm not an expert quilter by any means, but I enjoy working on quilts every now and then, and I enjoyed working on this one. Okay, so let's get on to the next project. Hope you're all having a good one out there. You take care, and I'll be talking to you again real soon, but for this time around, it's going to be bye for now.